You know, as I peruse down the fantasy football rankings, I often see guys who are ranked in positions that make me just go, what are we doing? Why is this guy here? Why is he not higher? I think he should be higher. And not to say that I know more than the experts, but I think I know more than the experts. They're all idiots, and I, unlike them, am not an idiot. So, I'm here today to tell you, hey, these guys are not being ranked correctly. They should be ranked much higher, in my opinion. And, however, they are not ranked higher. They are down here in the gutter with me and my 3-11 fantasy football team from last year. So, that provides us with a great opportunity to get some great value. I'm talking about that Dollar Tree type value on some players who are being criminally underranked, or maybe not so criminally underranked, but either way, these guys are not getting their full laurels. And that provides us with a great opportunity to get some high value fantasy football picks. So I'm going to go through a couple guys who I think will over exceed their ADP this year and who could really help anchor down your fantasy football team. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, let's start off with a guy who is pretty highly ranked, but who I think could and should be ranked a little bit higher. Amarian Hampton is a guy who I think that the talent's already there. We know the talent's already there, but the situation around him is moving towards a breakout year for him. And we already saw a lot of good stuff out of Amarian Hampton last year. I know if you look at the overall fantasy points scored per year last year, it wasn't great, but that he was injured, and the Chargers were also kind of a disaster. But despite that, he still had a lot of good games. And I think that coming into this year, you bring in Mike McDaniel as the Chargers' new offensive coordinator, previously the Miami Dolphins head coach. He's an offensive genius. Love that guy. I think that he's going to completely help elevate this offense. And you also look at the fact that last year, the main reason the Chargers' offense kind of sucked and struggled was both of their tackles died. They have two of the best tackles in football. They both died. Rashawn Slater played 0 snaps. Joe Alt played half a year. And by the end of the season, it was Justin Herbert against the world. And when the defense gets in your backfield about 0.5 seconds after the ball is snapped, it's kind of hard to do anything. And that kind of was why Amarian Hampton sucked sometimes. But if you look at this year, assuming that both tackles don't spontaneously combust, what's stopping Amarian Hampton from living up to the first round pick he was drafted with? He's in a backfield where there's basically no competition. I know Kamani Vidal exists. I'm not too scared of him. Keaton Mitchell comes over from Baltimore. He's an exciting guy. I kind of like him. I don't think he's contesting Amarian Hampton for anything significant. I'm sure those two guys will take some amount of passing down, maybe a few goal line touches. Probably going to snipe a touchdown here and there that's going to make you want to tear your hair out. But, Amarian Hampton's the guy. And I think that in this offense that should be elevated and reach what I think is its precipice under an offensive guy genius like Mike McDaniel, what's stopping Amarian Hampton from not just being an RB1, like where he's being drafted, but being a top 5 RB? And I think that, putting him up above guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor is getting a bit ahead of yourself. But putting him up above guys like Saquon Barkley, James Cook maybe, Ashton Genty maybe, if you want to argue that the Chargers are going to be a more competent offense and they're going to have more goal line work, isn't crazy. I think Amarian Hampton has just as good of a shot as a guy like Ashton Genty, who's getting talked up a lot right now, of being an elite running back this year, because the situation is going to be a lot better than it was last year. And because of that, I'm not afraid to take Amarian Hampton, I think, with a first-round pick. If you have a back half of the first-round pick, if you're pick 10, 11, 12, and you want to draft Amarian Hampton there because you want to make sure you get him because you're really in love with him, I don't think that's crazy. I think Amarian Hampton's an elite player. I think he hasn't even shown us the best of what he can do. And like I said, last year, despite all the stuff working against him, wasn't even that bad. In the grand scheme of things, besides the injury, which is non-football, performance related, last year wasn't that bad. So coming into this year, I'm really high on Amarian Hampton, a guy who's already ranked pretty highly. But, if you want to reach for a guy, I think Amarian Hampton's a great guy to plant your flag on as being a guy who's going to exceed his ADP in these first 2 rounds, where it's often hard to find guys who exceed where they're getting drafted because we've gotten so good at discerning where these elite players, should be ranked in comparison with one another. Next guy I want to talk about is Javonte Williams, running back 18, 40th overall player. I have him as a borderline RB1. I have him as RB13. I think he's being ranked outside of the top 12 RBs, which are the RB1s, because I think people don't believe in his upside. I think people with their RB1s want to take a shot at a guy who they think has a chance as finishing as the RB1, and I don't think that's Javonte Williams. But I think he's getting undervalued because he doesn't have that league-winning number one RB overall upside, when I think Javonte Williams is a very clean shot as an RB1. And I don't understand why he's being ranked all the way down in RB18. The Cowboys offense has undergone essentially no changes from next year to last year. You can argue for regression. I don't really see a big enough regression for it to impact Javonte Williams' value. There's absolutely no competition in this backfield. They added nobody through free agency or the draft this year. Jaden Blue technically exists, but I'm not really that scared of him as competition for Javonte. And this is a guy who finished last year in PPR as the RB7. And what's to stop him from doing that again? What's suggesting that he's not going to be the goal line back? He's not going to chug along for, 80 yards a game, score a touchdown, most games, and just finish as an RB1 overall. I just don't see the argument against Javonte Williams, especially for him to be ranked down in the 4th round. He is an absolute smash pick for me at that value, and he's a guy who, if you need a running back to anchor your team, you went, double RB, or you took a tight end in the first 3 rounds, and you need somebody to back up your wide receivers that you took early, I would take Javonte Williams, in the 3rd round. I think he's a great pick. I think he's being undervalued, and I just don't understand. I think it's because he's not the sexy pick. He's not the sexy pick who might run away, break off these massive runs, really look like a great play, be an above and beyond a great player, but he's a good player. And I think he's going to be able to anchor your fantasy team, and because of that, I'm really in on Javonte Williams this year. Taking a break from talking about the running backs, let's talk about a tight end. Tyler Warren, tight end for the Indianapolis Colts, tight end 4 overall, 52nd player. I also have him as the tight end 4 because, and this might be surprising, the tight end rankings this year are kind of rigid. It's basically Brock Bowers and Trey McBride in tier 1, and then tier 2 is some combination of Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, and then other guys kind of cycle in and out of there. But Tyler Warren is very clearly in this tier 2 with Colston Loveland and a few other guys. My argument with Tyler Warren is not that he should be ranked, as tight end 1 or anything, but that he's being ranked a little bit lower than I think he should in the overall consensus. I don't understand why there's a round separating him from Colston Loveland. There's about 10 picks between him and Colston Loveland, and I just don't get that. There's a lot of things to like about Tyler Warren, and I understand that the main downside of Tyler Warren this year is Daniel Jones is coming back from an Achilles injury. Daniel Jones has not been a historically great quarterback for most of his career, and now he's an injured quarterback who's not played great at points during his career, so I understand that's scary. But is it really so scary that we need to be dropping Tyler Warren 10 spots behind Colston Loveland? I like Colston Loveland, but he's in a super competitive receiving core with guys like Rome Odunze and Luther Burden, and he also his quarterback is Caleb Williams, who, yeah, I like Caleb. He's good. Caleb also struggles to be accurate at times, and Caleb is not an elite, passing quarterback as of now. He's good, but he's not elite. So I just don't understand why Tyler Warren is ranked so much lower than Colston Loveland when both of them have questionable quarterbacks for different reasons. But however, Tyler has, I think, less target competition than Colston Loveland. Yes, Alec Pierce exists and Josh Downs exists. They're both good. I think Tyler Warren is the number 1 option in this Colts offense, especially for Daniel Jones as he works back from an Achilles injury. Is he going to be throwing deep balls to Alec Pierce, trying to throw off his ruptured Achilles leg? No, he's probably going to be dumping it off to Tyler Warren when he gets into trouble. So I just don't understand why Tyler Warren is being ranked so much lower than Colston Loveland when I think that he really should be ranked about the same, if not higher. So because of that, I'm really in on Tyler Warren at his current ADP because I would be okay with him at Colston Loveland's ADP, but he's not at Colston Loveland's ADP. He's about 10 spots lower. So because of that, super in on Tyler Warren. He's probably my favorite tight end. He's not the tight end I would predict to finish as tight end number 1 overall, but he is my favorite tight end, I think, going into this fantasy season. All right, back to the running backs. Let's talk about J.K. Dobbins, RB35, 104th overall player. I have him a little bit higher at RB30. And it's mostly for me about J.K. Dobbins is you've got to put it in perspective of what he offers to a fantasy team. The big knock on J.K. Dobbins is that he blows out some part of his body by week 5 every single season, it seems like. He hasn't had a fully healthy season in like ever, probably since his rookie year on the Ravens. And that's a problem, right? If he's injured, he can't be on your team. Best availability is availability, you know? But you got to look at what he could do when he's healthy. And for at his price, outside the top 100 players, we're looking at an RB1 on an offense that is competent. I don't know if the Broncos offense is going to be great this year, but it's competent. And we saw last year, RJ Harvey, significant draft capital put into him. He was okay. He wasn't great. He definitely didn't steal J.K. Dobbins' job. Even when J.K. Dobbins went down, R.J. Harvey was mediocre at best, did not take his job. So coming into this year, J.K. Dobbins presumably is going to step back into that role as RB1. And I know a lot of people are projecting, oh, RJ Harvey takeover. RJ Harvey, second year breakout. He's going to take over this backfield. He's going to be the guy. And looking at the fantasy rankings, that is what seems to be what most people are projecting because RJ Harvey is significantly highly ranked compared to J.K. Dobbins. But I just don't see that happening. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to be the guy. And he's going to be the guy until the wheels fall off. And I know the wheels are probably going to eventually fall off, but here's the thing. Until they fall off, you're looking at an RB1. An RB1 who you got at the price of an RB3. And at that price, I'm pretty in on J.K. Dobbins because, you know, a guy in the 9th round who you can just stick in your flex, presumably, and who's going to grind out, you know, maybe low-end RB1 numbers at best, like, that's a great value. That's, you know, week winning value that can help you push you over the top in a week. And I know he's going to get injured at some point. It seems like all the evidence is pointing to he's going to get injured at some point. But until he gets injured, you're starting an RB1 for a pretty good team, and winning weeks is winning weeks. Like, I know everyone wants to talk about, you know, week 15 matchups in the fantasy playoffs and who's going to win you your leagues in those, you know, the playoff matchups. Winning early weeks matters too, because you need to win enough weeks to get to the playoffs. And if J.K. Dobbins can help you win a couple weeks early in the season, that's a pretty good use of a 9th round pick, to be honest with you. A lot of the time, once you get past round 8, you start, you know, your picks are sometimes useless. Like you're throwing darts, and, you know, half the time you might hit on something, but half the time you might not. So to draft a guy who you know is going to give you at least steady production for some amount of time, and who could be the anchor of a couple early week season wins, I'm in on J.K. Dobbins in that role. He's not a guy who I think is going to, you know, dominate and all of a sudden be this, like, second half of the draft breakout star who wins you your league. That's not who he is. But he's going to be a guy who can help anchor some early season wins and get you in a good position where if you draft the rest of your team well, you're going to have a good fantasy season. Is he going to get injured? Probably. Can he be good before he gets injured for you? I think yes. Not to leave the wide receivers out of this video, let's get a guy in here. Parker Washington, wide receiver 43, 91st overall player. I have him up as a borderline, you know, mid-wide receiver 3. I think he's a pretty good bet for a flex option in this upcoming season. The Jacksonville receiving core is kind of gross, trying to parse out who's going to be good this year. You've got 3 receivers who presumably are all battling for significant snaps. You've got Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington, and then Jacoby Myers. You've also got Evan Ingram in the mix as a receiving tight end who Jacksonville seems to like. So it's hard to determine who actually is going to be the best receiver in this receiving core this upcoming season. But if you look back at last year, the answer to who the best receiver was Parker Washington. Parker Washington averaged the most points out of the trio of receivers I mentioned when all 3 of them were on the field the second half of the season. He had a great rapport with Trevor Lawrence. He had a bunch of big weeks down the stretch. He had a couple dud weeks too, but I think that's what you're going to have to expect when you've got a 3-headed monster kind of receiving core. And if I'm going to have to take a guy out of this Jacksonville receiving core, why would it not be the guy who showed that he outproduced the other two when they were all on the field together? The note I have is when the last 9 games, when all 3 of them were on the field together, Washington averaged over 10 PPR points per game. That was more than either of them. Neither Myers nor Thomas averaged 10 points per game. And I think that if you want to bet on consistency, I think Parker Washington is going to be the most consistent. There may be weeks where Jakobi Myers and Brian Thomas have pop-off weeks, have spike weeks, and those will probably be weeks where Parker Washington disappears and isn't super helpful and he might bust. But if you want the most consistent guy, I'm going to go with Parker Washington. And the worst part, the thing that I don't understand, is he's the lowest ranked out of the 3 Jacksonville receivers. I don't understand why he's so much lower than Brian Thomas, and he's like a couple spots lower than Jakobi Myers. Last season, when you looked at the rankings, you looked at the stats, Parker Washington was the guy. And I don't understand why we're all of a sudden expecting him to not be the guy. I understand some people want Brian Thomas Jr. to get back to that rookie year form. They think he might be able to do that. I don't think he could do that because I think that him and Trevor just don't click for some reason. The only time Brian Thomas has looked like an elite receiver was when Mac Jones was playing, and I don't think he's returning from San Francisco anytime soon. And I like Jakobi Myers, but when it was him or Parker Washington, Trevor Lawrence chose Parker Washington. And because of that, I like Parker Washington, especially at his value. I think I'd be willing to take him as a flex, as my flex. And, you know, when it comes down to parsing through this complicated backfield, why not go with the guy who showed previously that he was the best option? All right, I wanted to highlight at least one quarterback in this video, and for the most part, though, I think that the quarterback rankings are pretty fair. There's some guys who I wouldn't take at their ADP, but I think that the rankings overall are pretty safe. So I decided to go with Jared Goff. He's a guy who I think is a little undervalued. He's QB 16 on the rankings. I think he's a little higher. I think he should be a QB 1 drafted. I have him at QB 11. The thing about Jared Goff, though, is he's not a guy who I'm super excited about. Like, to go back to what I said at the beginning of the video, these aren't necessarily my guys. These are guys who I just think provide value at their ADP. Not necessarily that they're going to be these big breakout stars, but that they just, because of where you can get them at, they're good. They provide good value to fill positions, assuming you draft competent rosters around them. And that's kind of what I think Jared Goff is. He's not a guy who's going to win you a fantasy championship on his own. He's not going to be Drake May from last year, who you got at the similar QB value, because I think we've already seen what Jared Goff's ceiling is. His ceiling appears to be about 30 touchdowns per year, 4,000 passing yards. You know, finish as a low-end QB 1. And that's where I think you should take him. But I think that he's kind of being undervalued because he's not the sexy pick. And the thing is, though, that a lot of the time, winning fantasy championships requires you to, at some point, just make a few unsexy picks. Just take the guys who are going to be, you know, steady rocks on which you can build your fantasy team. You know, take some high upside picks with some of your picks. Take some, you know, elite players with others. But then sometimes you just got to take a guy who's good. You just got to take a guy who's going to put numbers on the scoreboard. And that's what Jared Goff is going to do. He's going to have bust weeks. He's going to have weeks where he puts up, you know, finishes as a top 5 QB, has like 25 points. Going to have weeks where he has 10 points. And you just kind of roll with it. He's just a guy where you stick him in your lineup and you're just confident that he's going to provide enough value to get your roster to a win, because you drafted guys presumably ahead of him, since you drafted Jared Goff as, you know, outside the top 100. You drafted other players who are good enough that they're going to be the ones to carry the boat, and Jared Goff is just not going to drop the boat. And sometimes that's all you need, is a guy who's not going to drop the boat. So, am I super excited about Jared Goff? Would I, you know, actually maybe take him at QB 11? Probably not. I'm probably, if he was the actual QB 11, I'm probably not taking him because I'm probably chasing other value at that range. But where he's at the back half of drafts, outside of QB 1 range, why not? Jared Goff, solid guy, probably going to outperform his draft position. So, you know, he's a guy where he's just solid. And sometimes that's all you need to fill a position like quarterback, if you can get sexy picks at your running back and wide receiver. All right. last guy, I wanted to get in my bag a little bit. I wanted to put my foot forward with a guy who's he's pretty down the rankings, but I think he could very easily jump really far up the rankings. And the guy I chose is Jaden Reed, wide receiver for the Packers. He's currently wide receiver 48, 13th overall player. I have him as a borderline wide receiver 3 flex guy. I think Jaden Reed is being diabolically undervalued in this offense because we're all getting really hard for Christian Watson after the questionable extension the Packers gave him. And I think because of that, Jaden Reed's being kind of tossed to the side. But man, I remember to this day 2023 Jaden Reed and that run he had at the end of the season. You can go back and look it up if you want to. I don't have the numbers in front of me. But he put together an absolute masterclass at the end of the 2023 football season where he just railed off a series of 15 plus PPR point games, and it won me a fantasy championship. And because of that, I've always had a soft spot for Jaden Reed. And he had a bit of a down year last year, but that was mostly due to injuries. And I think that there's a good chance that Jaden Reed could emerge as the wide receiver 1 in this offense, especially if Christian Watson gets hurt. Because you look at the other guys who are around him. Romeo Doubs used to be a problem. He's gone now. More targets to go around. Matthew Golden, first round pick. Sure, buddy. Whatever you say. You can have your participation trophy if you want. I'm not really scared about Matthew Golden. He hasn't really proven it yet. So it's basically him, Christian Watson, and Tucker Kraft, who's a tight end. But he's coming back from an injury. Who knows what state he's going to be in. And I think that Jaden Reed, as this short yardage guy who also has sort of a Deebo Samuel-esque role where he can roll out of the backfield on some running plays every once in a while. I like Jaden Reed. And I think he's a very good candidate to exceed his ADP by a lot. Now, is he going to come back as a wide receiver 2? Probably not. You're probably not getting wide receiver 2 value out of Jaden Reed. But I do think you could get very easy startable value out of Jaden Reed, and he could emerge as a consistently productive receiver if he can establish himself in this offense. And I know Christian Watson is currently trending towards being the guy, but I've never been super impressed by Christian Watson, even without the injury stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Reed is the guy. Is he going to be the guy 100%? I don't know. But I do think that he's shown that he can be a consistent threat in this offense. And with the targets now being consolidated with receivers being moved out of the offense, and hopefully the Packers are going to lean on the pass a little bit more. They've been leaning on the run a lot these past couple of years, which has worked out somewhat, but I do think that Jordan Love has not yet been able to show the elite passing that I think he can do. So if they were to lean on the pass a little bit more with consolidated targets, with now that their clusterfuck of receivers is now less of a clusterfuck, I would not be surprised to see Jaden Reed emerge as the guy in this offense, especially if the chronically injured Christian Watson continues to be chronically injured. So Jaden Reed's a guy who I'm definitely targeting in the later half of drafts as a high upside dart throw with all of his talent and the situation trending towards an opportunity for him. But that's all I got for today. If you guys agree with my takes, let me know. If you don't, let me know. I want to see some hard evidence about why I'm wrong, though, because I feel pretty confident about all of this. But let me know. See ya.